Okay, I think we are live. There we go. Cool. How's it going there, everybody? Hope you're doing well today. Today is Monday, April 15th, 9:04 a.m. And today we're going to dive deep into dropdowns of HSDS React, specifically dropdowns v2. So what you're seeing right here is the storybook for the dropdown component. And dropdowns were one of the things I wanted to talk about a long time ago, but I think I needed to preface it with some of the other things first, which included talking about portaling, prop connecting, how that works with things like popovers and tooltips to prepare for the thing, the massive thing that is dropdowns. So here we have a dropdown that can render items that is fully mouse supported, like so, and it can also do keyboard support, up downs, escape to close, all that stuff. Tabbing works. And the drop down is also directionally aware. So if I move it and the thing is going to be touching the bottom, it'll drop up, but it'll only drop up if dropping up can be supported. Otherwise, it stays down. Yeah, what else can it do? Drop downs can also be nested. So you can have items that nest like this, and also left, right, and all that stuff works. The nesting can also move in another direction. It can move upwards and to the left-hand side like so, and the arrows are aware of that direction and it'll respond. Oh yeah, scrolling is also applicable if you do nesting as well. So you can scroll up and down, and if you do up and down on your keyboard, the scrollable menu knows how to respond to that and moves up and down as well. And what else? So yeah, there is a very interesting little directional movement buffer where if I move my mouse here to here, you see how I can do like a diagonal movement, like so. Um, there is some naive mechanism built inside of here that supports that kind of movement, which is great because typically people do move in a directional manner when it comes to navigating towards items, like so, versus directly like up, down, left, right only. You see this happening a lot with Apple's dropdowns, like so. Like here, the Apple's dropdowns allow for directional movement. What else is there? There's also support for groups. So here I have groups, and I have a group that's nested. Why not? You can have disabled items, or rather a disabled dropdown. Oh yeah, let's check this out. And the drop downs can be dynamic, so I can add additional items, or I can remove items like so, and it stays rendered, or it'll re-render in this current state. It does a lot of things. So the drop down does a lot of things. The most important thing is that it supports nesting with full keyboard support out of the box, and it is directionally aware. And I think that's the main thing. So the Dropdown V2, building this thing, this was without a doubt the most challenging thing to this date still, even though I built this a while ago, that I've ever done in my coding career. Nothing comes close. I built an entire CSS testing utility library very similar to Enzyme, but for SCSS and CSS, which is nuts, but also that doesn't hold a candle to how complex this thing is. I built a React Redux alternative, which happens to compile down to less than 2 kilobytes. It doesn't touch how complex this thing is. I built what you're seeing right now, Artboard, this thing that basically gives you a sketch-like experience with full dark mode support. Why not? And also a box supporter, a box inspector, a size inspector, color picker, all this stuff, which is used to render the storybook, which we use. Doesn't even come close to how complex the dropdown is. Like these guys, if you want nesting, reverse direction, directional awareness, on-the-fly updates, on-the-fly directional awareness, like so. Do not estimate them. They are incredibly, incredibly complex, which is why I waited a while to talk about it. the drop-down component is one of those things where it's like it's basically a mini application, but that happens to be a component. Um, what you're seeing right here, v2, all these files, this is the thing that is required to build Dropdown v2 within HSDS React to do all the things that we needed to do. So we have the main entry point, which is fine. What are we talking about? Oh, yes. So there is a Redux-like structure within Dropdown. It uses Redux, which is the smaller library that I talked about here, to handle all this stuff. And this is the state we have for the dropdown. This is the initial state. Lots of things going on that have to do with class names, direction, sizing, like max height, max width, all that kind of stuff. Callbacks like on blur, on menu mount, whether you want your dropdown to be rendered position fixed or absolute, which is also kind of important. State reducer, which is really cool. It was a concept, I believe, that was either introduced or pioneered or popularized by Kenzie Knotts. And the first time I saw him using it was inside of the PayPal dropdown, which was downshift, which I used a lot as the inspiration for how dropdown v2 will work. Here. Downshift. Yeah, this too is a very, very complex component. Not nearly as feature-packed as Dropdown because it's not designed to be. This one's designed to be a low-level primitive to allow you to construct Dropdown to be like however it is you want. Let me see if I can find examples. If I can't find it really quick, I'll give up. Cool. Open this. I did. I swear there was an example. Oh, great. Now it's recursively opening code sandboxes. Never mind. So downshift, the purpose of downshift is to allow you to create a combo box, meaning a input with items inside, and then as you type oh, I have a combo box component right here. Combo box. Yes. Like that. This is basically downshift. It allows you to have items, and as you type, it filters the items, it renders like so. Dropdowns are different. Dropdowns, they present items, but dropdowns can be nestable. Combo box typically aren't nestable. Cool. With that out of the way, we have a store. The store with all the state and has a reducer, like what you would get from Redux. It has all these action types that it reduces and transforms a state. You have your actions, which there are plenty of to that fire from all the various drop-down components that manipulate the state. We have the action types, very kind of standard Reduxy kind of stuff. So yeah, let's start with the entry component, which is drop-down container. Right. So this guy plucks all the little subcomponents from drop-down and adds them as static properties. That allows you to do dropdown.header, dropdown.menu, or whatever to access all those static properties. You'll see this pattern being used throughout HSDS a lot. Oh yeah, the hyphen. So what that does is basically it gives any dropdown or any component that uses this particular factory the ability to render unique IDs for every single instance. So here we have HSDS dropdown v2 3. This is the third dropdown that has rendered within the life cycle of my application so far. So every additional dropdown will get an incremental bump in the ID, guaranteeing them to all be unique. So that's cool. Setting up some initial state stuff. Oh yeah, so this is really interesting. So basically all this stuff is setting up the store to get the dropdown ready to do its thing. And where is it? Oh boy. So the really interesting thing that needs to happen is that's kind of unique compared to other Redux applications is typically within a Redux application, You have your main entry point, your main application, your provider, and all that kind of stuff. Your state is kind of living up here. And the things that can manipulate your state are all down here, inside of your components, inside your containers, and so on. These are the things that can manipulate the state based on user interactions, based on API calls, or whatever. But because this is a component, all this stuff still needs to happen. User interactions and stuff still need to manipulate its state. But the consuming application, being the application that uses the dropdown, also needs to be able to change the state of the dropdown by adding or removing items, by controlling whether or not it's open or not, things like that. The application should be able to do these things like any other component. So tapping into the component will receive props, lifecycle hook. We do some sort of like prop consolidation between the current state and the states that it's receiving. And with this very interesting bit of logic, we're able to figure out the new state that should be populated and rehydrated into the store with this hydrate store with props. Basically, it's just setting the state into the store. Man, and there's a lot of tiny little performance things built into here. One of which is this get shallow diff function. Where does that even come from? Get shallow diffs. Ah, cool. It's coming from React Utils. Very handy. Highly recommend it. React Utils has a lot of handy things built inside of there. Basically, it does a comparison between two objects, their key value pairs, and whatever objects, whatever diffs that happen to be there, you'll get, I think, either an array or an object of all the diffs. And here it's just seeing what diffs change to get the next state, and then it'll repopulate the store with the next state based on those diffs only. And this is really important because if you don't ever want a component, especially as complex as Dropdown, to be re-rendering all the time or re-rendering at all. You only want it to re-render when it absolutely has to. And the reason for that is because Dropdown has a lot of things going on. It can also have a lot of items. So anytime a re-render happens, it triggers that React re-render consolidation between the parent and all of its children. It spreads throughout the tree. And if you have a older version of React, being React 15, that process is not as optimized as React 16 Plus, which they use their new fiber architecture to kind of make things a little bit more performant. So yeah, that's performance is really, really important. So now that we've set up our provider, we've set up our store, we've set up some store prop consolidation between external properties being passed in via an application, and also the internal bootstrapped store with initial state. All that stuff. It's already set up. Now we can render the dropdown, which is connected to the store. All these components are connected to the store. So how am I on time? I am 18 minutes in, and I've only talked about the entry point of the dropdown. This might be a multiple episode screencast thing because dropdowns are so complex, but they're really, really important. It's one of those things where it's like, it's a base component. A dropdown is a base component similar to inputs and other things. And the more often a component is used throughout an application, or the more times you see it repeated, the more important it is to get right. And also, sometimes the more complex it is. So inputs, for example, are extremely complex. Popovers and tooltips are very complex. Buttons are complex, but more from a rendering presentational standpoint. They're very complex there. Dropdowns are just complex all around. It's great. So we have our initial dropdown. There are methods here that allow you to render a bunch of things. So the goal of dropdown is to be able to render something that looks like this with a very minimal work required by the user to do so. So if I do, the API for Dropdown is basically Dropdown. Oh, I forgot to zoom in my code editor. I apologize if everything so far was really small. I am off today. I haven't done this in a while, so that's because I was traveling and stuff. So Dropdown. All you really need to do is give it items, which is an array of stuff. Actually, you don't even need to give it items. You can just do that, and Dropdown will render. Nothing will happen. Yeah, you'll see maybe a trigger with the word Dropdown. I'm not sure, but nothing will happen. So once you give it an array of stuff, it'll be able to render this, and you get everything out of the box, keyboard support and so on. Cool. And the more you need to tweak and refine Dropdown, it's all up to you. Just add additional props. So we see how we can use it from a very simple out-of-the-box standpoint, but Dropdown was designed to be as flexible as you need it. You can, if you wanted to, do I have examples here? Custom. Yeah. You can customize however it is, any one of these little subcomponents look like. It's up to you. All of those subcomponents are provided for you and can be rendered via the render property of Dropdown. So if you did this, it is now up to you to render the menu, the items, and all that kind of stuff however it is you want. Let's see. However, if you use drop-down menu and then here you would do like, I think, it's been a while since I used this API, but here I believe it provides you with items. So here you can map through all your items to render the blah, 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 drop-down menu. So if you use the default drop-down components out of the box, like so, it gives you, these guys know how to handle the keyboard support and stuff. So yeah, you can have additional div wrappers that are styled to do whatever it is you want. So for example, these guys, but using the items, or there might be like a get item props or something. Give me a second. I should have prepared. Items, my custom items. Oh, I don't even need to get item props. I just need to spread the items. Yeah, so all the stuff has already been built into items. And you just spread your items to whatever custom thing you want, and then you magically have all the drop-down things associated with that item. So, get item props. What am I talking about? This comes back to downshift, the inspiration for all the things. Nope, I need to see the GitHub. Get item props. Yeah. So downshift, it basically does a very similar thing, but in order for you to get properties for the items or the menu, you have to instantiate a particular function. The design decision I made for Dropdown v2 is that that's already done for you under this items array for these enhanced items, and you just spread them and then you're able to use it out of the box. No need to instantiate anything. So that makes it a little bit simpler. Cool. So if you wanted to render a custom dropdown to do custom things or make it look a little bit differently or whatever you need, how do I scroll here? Oh, neat. You can use the render property like so and render it as however it is you want. Okay, I'll keep this guy open just in case. I'm gonna zoom out a little bit. Cool. Get trigger props. Render trigger. So we have some methods here that kind of handle the rendering of your trigger mechanism. So your trigger, by default, is a link that looks like this. However, you can make your trigger look like a button or whatever component it is you want. We have an example here, split button. Yeah, so we have a button, and we have this other little button that happens to be a dropdown. There we go. Yay. So this is a dropdown that has a custom trigger, and that custom trigger happens to look like a tiny little button. Cool. all of this stuff here that you're seeing is basically setting up the rest of the components. It's rendering the menu, it's rendering the trigger, it's like setting up the trigger mechanism and all that kind of stuff. This is all this little entry point does. And let's check render trigger, trigger. Cool. Let's check out trigger. Okay. Okay. Let's look at the trigger mechanism now, or the trigger component. This trigger component has a bunch of properties, and I believe all those properties are bound to Redux or Redux. I'm just gonna say Redux. You know what I'm talking about. It's a thing that controls state. Oh, on blur, all that stuff is not here. I wonder why I defined it. Yeah, why did I do that? I guess this isn't necessary. I think it was at one point, but now not anymore. I can probably delete that. But yeah, this doesn't really do anything special other than when it opens and closes, it'll trigger the open and close action, which opens and closes the dropdown. This is really, really nice, being able to control that bit of state just by doing something like this within the trigger. And the main thing that the trigger needs to do is know how to handle a key down, or an enter press, or a tab. So if I am on my dropdown here, if I have my trigger on focused, which you can't really see, but it's focused, and if I press down on my keyboard, the dropdown should open. I'll press escape. If I press enter, the dropdown should open. And what happens if I press tab? Yeah, tab goes down. If I press shift tab, hopefully this works. Yeah. If you shift tab on the first item, it'll tab to the trigger, which will then close the dropdown. So all of those interactions, you don't get this out of the box. You have to build it in yourself. And you see a lot of it happening within Dropdown in order to handle all of those kinds of cases, like like opening and closing dropdowns when you press enter and so on. Yeah, so this one's quite simple. Oh yeah, here, check this out on key down. So I mentioned this in several screencasts before, but anytime you intercept a particular callback, event callback that is native to HTML/React, be sure to call the prop version of that so that when people do decide to tap into on key down or on click or any of that kind of stuff, that their particular declaration of that callback doesn't get swallowed up. You should create your components in a way that makes it intuitive to use. Like you should be able to use dropdown trigger out of the box, just like if you were to create a React link or anything else. As Nicholas put it, create something with least surprise. He probably said it. He said it way more elegantly than I did. But something least surprise. So that is the trigger. Okay, here we go. Menu. This is the guy that renders the dropdown. No, it's not. I lied. It renders the menu container. The menu container is like an application all of its own. It takes care and tracks so many bits of state, as you see here. It's plucking from the Redux store. It dispatches a lot of actions, I suppose. Oh boy. And it does a lot of stuff. Man, 400 plus lines of a little subcomponent. That's a lot. That is a lot that it needs to do. So I might have to cut this short today, and I'm going to stop at the menu container because again, Dropdowns nuts. There are a lot of properties that the menu container consumes. The reason why this particular guy is so complex is because it is the main thing that manages all the interactions between the user and all the drop-down items. The primary entry of Dropdown is the thing that binds the internal dropdown, all the things that are happening within Dropdown, and also state that could be coming in from the outside via properties. So that's where that complexity lives, and all the interaction stuff is managed by menu container, which lives a little bit lower in the hypothetical stack. Oh man, the memoizing, a bunch of other stuff. I'm just. It's been a while since I've taken a look at this. So menu, what does it do? It does a combination of two things. It prepares the items to be rendered, and it takes care of directional awareness, and it renders a very special component that is responsible for rendering the UI and interactions for any single time you need to highlight an item and so on. So those are three things. For this screencast, I'm just going to touch upon the component that is responsible for rendering UI. We have a dedicated rendering engine, if you will, for the drop-down interface that is outside of React. The reason why this is really important is because if I jump to React Dev Tools, let's pull up an example, downshift. Oh, yeah, you can't see downshift. What's another really popular one? React Select. Let me see if I can render it. Not. There's something funky going on here. Let's just, oops. There we go. Cool. Cool. All right. Downshift. I'm going to get rid of that. React Select. This is also another component that I looked at very heavily when developing Dropdown V2. I actually looked at this very heavily. I read through the source code and did experiments and everything. So, as I'm scrubbing up and down through the component here, what you're seeing on the right-hand side, by the way, is React Dev Tools for Chrome. Anybody can download it. Once you click on the little cog, there is a thing called Highlight Updates. And you can see all the updates are highlighting. Basically, that means that anytime React needs to render or do any kind of render reconsolidation, any of that kind of stuff, it'll flash. Things don't necessarily re-render, but that process is happening. So the more times that it flashes like that, the bigger the performance, the theoretical performance hit that you're going to take. Can I pull up this thing? Where is it? Performance monitor. Cool. So because I'm currently, thankfully, on a very powerful computer, this is no longer that much of an issue. But previously, when I was on a not as powerful MacBook Pro, certain components that did flash a lot, like so, I would take quite the performance hit. Like the CPU usage would skyrocket, and it would be bad. Yeah, so this is doing quite well right now, which is great. So the reason why this happens is because the component, and I don't blame Jed Watson or anybody who worked on React Select. This is, I think, in my opinion, how they built it is how you're supposed to build it. It's just React and JavaScript and stuff right now can't handle it in a super hyper performant way, like how we want them to handle it. So what I mean by that is, oh, I have to sneeze. Excuse me. Bless your headphones and your ears. I apologize. So how they've done it is basically you have state that populates down, and then you iterate throughout all your items, and if the index of the whatever is being selected, whether that's by your mouse or your keyboard, if it matches the index of the item, therefore, then you will highlight it. That means it's selected, otherwise you don't. Very declarative, very reactive way of doing it. However, if you do that, you need to, all your components, all your items need to go through that render consolidation process, which means a render flash or a highlight update flash every single time I move my mouse or my keyboard. And if you have a lot of items in your dropdown, and if your dropdown happens to be within a pretty heavy application, this can slow it down real fast, which is unfortunate. So if I check out dropdown v2, if I open this dropdown, if I scrub up and down the dropdown here, you see I have highlight updates. You don't see any flashes. You'll see flashes in this general red or like container area. I think that might be because of artboard, I'm not too sure. But I can scrub up and down like this with my keyboard, and we don't see any render flashes. Let me pull up performance metrics. Oh yeah, we have some performance guys down here. 60 FPS, which is great. Again, it's a little bit harder to see, I suppose, on this computer because it's so fast. Interesting. So we do see a bigger CPU hit when I do this. So reasons for that is because one, I'm screencasting. Two, I believe this is being compiled under. Can I see? I need to see the icon. Is this production? I can't tell. So you should be able to see if this is under production load or not, or rather, if this is the production compiled React or not. I believe it is. But yeah, there are a lot of items to scrub through, and I have this guy also takes up some memory to run and so on. But overall it performed very well. We don't see a lot of render flashes happening. I'm going to close this now. So all of that is being handled by a very special component called renderer. Renderer pays attention to the item that's selected, the index, and all of that kind of stuff. You know, what it does with vanilla JavaScript, not React, vanilla JavaScript, it'll query select and run through all the necessary items and so on, and apply the UI changes required to get the highlighted state for highlighted UI for whether your thing is selected or not. That is the job of renderer. It does all this kind of stuff in, I suppose, an imperative fashion outside of React's render cycle. And the reason for this is purely for performance. So when I initially coded Dropdown v2, I didn't do it with a renderer. I did it just like how Downshift or React Select or any other dropdown library that you've seen out there or select library that you've seen out there, how they did it. You would have some sort of map or an array of all your items. You track the index number of what is selected, and then you iterate all throughout all your items and apply the selected class or whatever it is necessary for that item. You use the React like item map, whatever it is, to do that. But I found it to be really slow, or you take a big performance hit once you start nesting. So this is a very, very important thing to consider when building something like Dropdown. There is a reason why nested dropdowns aren't common within component libraries. And that is because they are insane to build, to support, and so on. Bootstrap had nested dropdowns in v2, but they dropped it for v3, and they haven't been supported since. My guess is due to the complexity of it. Downshift, React Select, they don't have nested dropdowns. React Bootstrap, Material UI might, but a lot of them don't. Let me just do a quick sanity check. And if they had, how do I see your components? Component demos? What did you call them? Menus? Okay, I'm going to time box it to 5 seconds. If I can't find it, then I give up. So I'm going to assume that Material UI doesn't have nested dropdowns. If there was a library that I saw that did have nested dropdowns that did not have keyboard support for nested dropdowns, which defeats the purpose. You need to have full keyboard support for both a standard non-nested dropdown and a nested dropdown. This is where the insanity gets increased by 3x when you want to have full keyboard support for that. Adding in directional awareness of whether it should be dropping left or right based on positions and all that kind of stuff, that's a whole nother level of math that you need to factor in. Also, one very important thing that Dropdown has out of the box, and this was a very design decision from the very beginning and also very painful to support, is full accessibility support. So we have, where is it? Very difficult. I mean, it's very difficult for me to see. I can't imagine how it would be for you to see. So if I check out Dropdown, you can see that there should be ARIA things in here. Role is an option because it's an item, and the ARIA disabled because it's not disabled. And we have ARIA labeled by. Cool. So the menu is labeled by the trigger that describes it, and then there should be ARIA things in here to describe whether or not something is selected. Things have changed. There are so many things in there, it's so hard for me to tell. But there should be something somewhere that tells, oh my goodness. Oh, it's here. Inspect, I think. Oh, crap. Cool. So yeah, there's ARIA stuff built throughout the entire thing. We can see that this is a list box. It's not expanded right now. If you expand it, it's expanded and so on. Lots of things built into here for accessibility support, which is important. And it's great that's built in because you, as the consuming person using Dropdown, you don't have to think about it. So yeah, I'm going to stop it here for today. So we went over how stupidly complex a Dropdown component can be. The entry point of the Dropdown, how it constructs the initial store and consolidates the incoming properties that the application gives it with the current state to feed into the store via this initial, where is it? Via this component will receive props mechanism that does diffing and funnels all that stuff through to update the store. Cool. We understand that there is basically Redux set up for this component with a bunch of different states, with a reducer with actions like you would get out of the box Redux. We have the trigger, which basically, the trigger is probably one of the most simplest components within Dropdown. All it does is it renders a thing, but it does some important duties in that it needs to know how to handle what happens when you press key down or enter and tab, things that you would expect a Dropdown to do that you don't get out of the box. You therefore have to handle it yourself. Make sure you don't swallow properties like on click or on key down when your component intercepts the underlying DOM node to do these things. Allow for the consuming user to register things like on click or on blur or whatever it is as if you were using a native HTML component. Make sure you don't swallow things, that's really important. The menu container, which is responsible for preparing and rendering items, rendering the render engine, if you will, for Dropdown in order for hyper performance. And what else does it do? Oh yeah, it's also responsible for directional awareness. So whether to drop something up or down. And all we had time to go over today was the render engine side of things that basically renders all the interactions that you see within Dropdown, like so, basically item selecting outside the render loop of React in a hyper performant, low level, native JavaScript way. Unfortunately, which involves a mixture of declarative and imperative programming in order for you to do that. But all that's subtracted from you, so you don't have to think about it. And by doing this in outside the React render cycle, we have things that we bypass the React render consolidation process. So anytime updates occur, like so, it doesn't affect any of the items, which you could have hundreds of items. You could have 500 items. You could have thousands of items. It bypasses all that, which is great. And let me just check out performance. Let's scrub up and down really fast. Let's see what it looks like. Right. So this remains relatively high at 60 FPS, and again, my computer is taking quite a bit of a hit because I'm live streaming. And these spikes, these flame tree spikes, they aren't as deep. They're quite shallow in nature. They only kind of go like this. And most of this, I think, is other stuff. Very difficult to tell. But by using native JavaScript, these guys are very small and they're quite shallow. If you use React to do it, it would be very, very deep. So yeah, that's it for Dropdowns for now. Probably have episode 2 and episode 3. Probably episode 2. We should be able to wrap it up in episode 2. That goes over the magical directional awareness thing here. Oh, probably need 3 episodes. Yeah, we need to go over magical directional awareness. We need to talk about the render property. We need to talk about item mapping. We need to talk about state reducer. So stay tuned for that. Thank you so much for tuning in to this very intense screencast. Hope you have a fantastic day. Bye.